So welcome to session 7. We're 25% of the way there. And this session, I think, is kind of a special one for me. It's kind of going back to where I was, only 3.5 years ago in Fulton Trotter, and seeing how the processes I set up a decade ago in 2013 are essentially moving on or evolving. Or being continued to be managed without me being there. And having Scott present today on managing attribute chaos is a fitting presentation. I think for those that are unaware, the number of attributes that I originally built into Fulton Trotter's templates were in the thousands, and I'd probably say to anyone that we had we had, and I don't have any more, the most attributes ever built into a template. And it was all done for a purpose, in which you'll understand a bit later in a presentation when I talk about Mortar. But for me, seeing Scott present and demonstrate some of the challenges that we face within Archicad in maintaining greater attributes or consistency of attributes across multiple files, to me, is a reason why we created attribute numbers with matching index numbers to start with, to try and reduce the number of challenges that we faced as users. But today, I'm really excited to see Scott present and share with you how Fulton Trotter are going today with regards to managing their attributes. So take it away, Scott.
Thanks for that introduction, Nate. Hi, my name's Scott. I'm a BIM manager and an associate at Fulton Trotter Architects in Australia. And this session I've dubbed the dark side of attribute chaos. We had a pretty significant realization about 10 years ago at FTA about how badly attributes can mess up your files, specifically in hotlink projects. At FTA, we're a Brisbane and Sydney-based firm, and we pride ourselves on community-based projects. And we like to push the envelope on what Archicad can do for us. I myself have been using Archicad for the past 15 years and have really gone down the rabbit hole to the nitty-gritty parts of the software and how I can hack it to make it work best for us. A couple of acknowledgements. Thanks very much, Nate, for putting this conference together. It's really great to have so many passionate Archicad users together in one spot. And thanks to the team at FTA for coming along on this journey of pushing the envelope of Archicad. A briefer agenda of topics and learning objectives we'll cover in this session. We'll look at the inner mechanics of how attributes are managed in Archicad and how chaos can unravel and potentially cause disasters in your file, how hotlink modules don't play nicely with attributes. We'll look at some techniques to get ahead of attribute management and prevent the chaos, specifically on hotlink modules. And then we'll look at some experimentation I've been looking into, utilizing Python and Excel to help clean up and make bulk edits to attributes. Okay, first up, we need to take a little bit of a step back and talk about some inherent systems and logics within Archicad. These dictate how attributes are handled within Archicad. It might seem a little bit dry to start with, but stay with me as this starts to get all pretty confronting pretty quickly. So the first concept we need to understand is index numbers. And if you've ever come across an Archicad user who's seen the dark side of attributes, they will start to obsess over index numbers, as we do at FTA and as I do myself. Every attribute in Archicad has a unique number assigned to it for each type of attribute. The best way to see these numbers is to open up the attribute manager. So if we go to options, element, attribute manager, and this is the old pre-Archicad 26 attribute manager I'm opening up. You can see on the left-hand side the numbers increasing, the index numbers for that building material attributes. So in the standard Australian Archicad template, we have a building material called brick with an index number of 1. And then surfaces, for example, we have the brick running bronze surface with an index number of 1. So each different attribute has its own index number listing. Now, the most fundamental concept to understand here is that when you assign an attribute to an element, be it a layer, building material, surface, fill, etc., all you are actually doing is just assigning the index number of that attribute to the element. So if we have a slab, we go to settings, we select this brick, all we're actually assigning is index number 1 to that element, and then it's reading all the relevant information from that attribute. Just keep that in the back of your mind. So the next concept we need to get our head around is how Archicad decides what index numbers to assign to what attributes. So I've got a couple of Archicad files here side by side with a super simplified set of attributes, just some fills here on the left and on the right, which I'm just going to use to demonstrate the different arrangements of how attributes move between files when they're copy pasted. So the most common way that people would create attributes is by just creating it through the relevant attribute control panel. So if we go to fills, for example, here, and go new, we can just call this new attribute, go OK, go OK. We can see there our new attribute has arrived at index number 23. So I've created a little diagram here to show you how the attributes have changed here. And in this instance, this new attribute we've created has been added at the very end of the attribute list at index number 23. So next, I'm going to demonstrate what happens if you start to copy paste elements from one file to another. An important thing to remember is that when you copy elements, any attributes that are attached to the elements will also be brought into your destination file. And this is where the attribute chaos starts to occur. So I have a drafting fill here with the stipple hatch applied to it. And I'm going to copy that from this file over to my destination file. And we can see here that it's arrived at attribute number 20. It was originally attribute number 20, so that all works pretty well. If we then look at the little diagram, we've got that one coming from 20, stretch 20, so that comes through at the original index number. So that's nice and neat and works well. So let's try that again, but in this instance, index number 20 is already being used on our destination file side. So let's grab our fill, stipple hatch, and paste it across here. In this instance, it's dropped it into index number 9. So things start to go a little bit right here. So if we refer to our little diagram here, we've got stipple at index number 20. It's moving across. 20 is not available. So it's going to put it at the first available free index spot, which in this instance is index number 9. All right, so let's try that with a different fill. This time I'm going to use the foreground attribute fill that's applied to this element here. And you'll notice on the destination side, we already have an attribute with the name foreground. So let's copy this here across. You'll notice on our destination side, none of the attributes have actually changed. Let's refer to our little diagram here. And you can see that actually nothing has actually been imported into our destination file. Archicad's found a fill with the attribute name foreground already, and it's decided for us that it would apply that attribute to this element that we've copied across. So let's try that again, but in this instance, we're going to use a fill with an installation hatch on it. And you'll notice we're in index number 21 on the left, and on the right, we also have a fill with the name installation, but the hatch on that one is completely different. So I'm going to copy this, I'm going to paste it here, and you'll notice that's the element we copied across, but the fill hasn't come across that installation hatch. It's actually applied this black fill, even though the name of that attribute was the same. So Archicad's made an assumption for us here that we want to use this fill, but it's actually completely different. So if we refer back to our little diagram again, in this instance, nothing's been imported to our new file, but it's actually visually changed the representation of that element. Here's where things start to go a little bit off the track. So let's try that again, because it may be in the index number clashing that caused the issue in the previous example. So in this instance, we've actually cleared out index number 21. It's free and available to copy that attribute over into the destination file, but we still do have a attribute with the name installation in our destination file. Let's copy, paste it across, and it's done the same thing as before, because in this instance, Archicad only looks at the name of attributes. It ignores the actual index numbers. If the name already exists in the destination file, it's going to apply that attribute to the element we've copied across. So let's refer to our diagram for this one too. We've got installation at 21, not being copied across because installation already exists regardless of what index number that exists at. So I've created a little flowchart here just to explain the different logics of how Archicad decides where to put attributes when they're created or copied into a file. So if we've got a brand new attribute that we're creating within Archicad, it will always import that or create it at the end of the attribute list at the highest index number available. If the attribute is being copied across, it'll go through this process of deciding, does the name already exist? Does the index already exist? And then based on that logic, decide that it'll put it at the correct index number. It'll import it at the first free index number, so kind of in the middle, or will it swap it out for a different attribute that already exists with that name? So the first few are fine, but the bottom ones start to get really bad. And then the bottom ones, where it's actually swapping out an attribute from what's being copied in, starts to cause turmoil within your files when you're trying to work with hotlinks. So the examples I've shown so far only really deal with fills because they're really simple and help to explain the concept. But as we know, as we work with files, there are a whole range of different attributes that we work with, and different elements work with different attributes, and different attributes can have different attributes embedded within them. So this is just a little table summarizing the most basic understanding of how different elements have different attributes applied to them. And then the next little flowchart shows you how different attributes are embedded within other attributes. So as I mentioned before, when you copy an attribute from one file to another, not only will it bring those main attributes in, but it'll bring everything else that may be embedded within the elements or the attributes themselves. So something like a complex profile, it's going to bring through line types, building materials, surfaces, and fills all in one go. So if you're not starting to keep on track of what's coming into your file, things are going to start to unravel really quickly. And when you start to work with hotlinks, that unraveling starts to go disastrous. So let's have a look at how this all works with hotlink modules. So I've got my two examples here side by side. I've got my hotlink on the left-hand side, and I've got a host file on the right-hand side that I'm going to place that hotlink in. So I just place this here, place it, let's come in, we go to 3D, we've got that element. So we can see on the left-hand side, we've got two attributes. We've got a white paint and a black paint. And then on the right-hand side, we've only brought through the white paint element. The reason that is because only that white paint attribute has been allocated to these walls. Got that there. So then in our hotlink placed in this file, we've got those same white paint elements. Looks all good. So what happens if we start to change some things? So if we start to change a couple of these walls to have the black paint, let's update this black there. Let's save this module. Let's update our hotlink. Let's see that's updated fine, and it's brought through that black paint now. Looks all good. So let's make some changes on both sides. So we want to add some paint, green paint in our module file. So call it green paint. And then as we saw in our previous examples, that's going to add it to the end of the list. It's going to be index number 3. On the host side file, some other things may have happened in the file, and someone's had to make another surface in this file, and they have gone and made a red paint, for example. Now, as the logic as we determined before, it's assigned that as index number 3. So let's green paint to these walls, save that, update our hotlink. So just like in our example previously, index number 3 wasn't available for green paint to come through. So it's assigned it as the next available one, which is index number 4. We start to get some issues with things not lining up between our original host file and our hotlink module. If we then decide that this green paint, we need to change the settings of that because the green that was set there originally is not quite right. So we're going to change this to a light green, a bit more of a fluoro green. We're going to keep the name exactly the same. Just bear with me. We're going to save that, update our hotlink module, and it hasn't changed those attributes in our host file. So again, Archicad's made an assumption. It's gone, green paint attribute already exists in our host file. Therefore, I don't need to move that information across and update it. That starts to get into where we're having issues because we want this paint color to come through. So what if we went and renamed this paint and called it light green paint? I'm going to save that, update our hotlink. So that's brought that new thing in. But now we've got another attribute at index number 5, and the original green paint attribute is still there. Let's just ignore that for the moment and think that that might be okay. What if we decide that actually we need to put the Dulux specific code of what that paint color is? So we're going to go Dulux code hash, because I don't know what the actual code is. So let's save that again. We haven't actually changed any settings of that green paint. We've only changed the name. Update. That's brought in yet another attribute with that new code. And we've still got these remnant attributes of the old things that they were. But again, if we went and changed the settings of this attribute, if we change that color to a completely different color, yellow, name stays the same, save that, update that, the color doesn't come through. So we've got this issue where we're updating things in a hotlink module, we're updating the hotlink module, but the actual changes aren't coming through. And when we do rename an attribute, the changes are creating new attributes and leaving the old ones behind, creating this trail of debris. We've also got an issue where the index numbers of those attributes, we've got these walls here with the now yellow paint assigned with index number 3, but these elements here are assigned with index number 6. So let's look at another example how the visual representation of attributes due to these issues can actually be swapped out. So let's make a new attribute surface in here, in a module file. We're going to make this a blue paint. I'm going to assign that to these two walls here. Now, in this other file here, someone may have already made a blue paint, but they forgot to set the color for that, and they've left it as black. So let's save this. Let's update this hotlink. So we've assigned a blue paint here. We've made it blue, but Archicad's ignored that because there was already an attribute in here called blue paint. So it's assigned this blue paint, which is actually black. This is obviously a really serious issue and seriously hampers our workflows when we're working with hotlinks. So what if we want to work with multiple hotlinks? Got another little hotlink here with some curved walls and a pink paint that I've applied to this element. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to floor plan and place that as a hotlink. Hotlink number 2. So that's all worked pretty well. We've brought those new elements through. It's brought through that new pink paint. It's brought it through a completely arbitrary index number from before, but we'll deal with that later. We decide, actually, we want that pink paint to be in our first hotlink too. So let's make another wall paint in here. And someone else has been making this because they're working with that other hotlink file. So they've ended up calling it pink wall paint. And they've set it to a slightly different pink color. So grab those elements here. And we'll assign that pink wall paint. We'll save that one, and then we will update our hotlink. So it's brought through those changes because it's a brand new name, brand new attribute. But then we've realized, oh, actually, we want all those elements to be the same color. So how do we get that information back to our previous files and rationalize all these attributes across our multiple hotlinks? The most logical way would be to decide which file is going to be our single point of truth for attributes. The most logical arrangement is to use the host file, because that's the one that's going to be seeing all of this information, and then we can use that information to distribute it back to our other files. So normally we could just use the old attribute manager. And we've got our surfaces here. And we could transfer those over and then import them back into our new file. But because of all these issues with index numbers, how do we know what is the correct attribute to actually move across back to our previous file? And here's where we get into techniques to being able to clean up attributes. So the first step of cleaning up the attributes across our hotlink modules is deciding what is actually needed and what is unnecessary excess debris. So I've got my 3 files here side by side, my 2 hotlinks and my host file on the right, and I can see all the attributes across those 3 files easily, just the way that I've arranged them. So by quickly using the purge function, within the attribute manager, I can easily see which of these attributes are completely unnecessary and just get rid of them straight away. Gets rid of the debris, and then I can start to rebuild all of my attributes across my files as required. So as you can see now, I've really simplified it down to only 2 attributes across all 3 of these files, but the names aren't exactly the same at the moment. So on this one, we're going to decide to use the same name as the other 2, the pink paint. So I'll rename that back to pink paint. And the last thing we need to do is make sure all of our index numbers are aligned. So the white paint is 1 across all of them, but the pink paint is 8 across 2 of them and 5 on the first hotlink. So I'm going to re-index this one and then re-index that to 8. So now all of our attributes are aligning. The actual settings of all the attributes aren't the same. We can see the pink of this one is slightly different, and the pink of these 2 is the lighter pink that we chose. Again, we have to decide which is the one that we're going to use across all of them. We're going to use this one, and we're going to manually transfer that information across to all of the other hotlinks. So if I go to the old attribute manager and we go to surfaces, I'm going to grab both of those attributes and then move them over to the right with the by index. So that preserves those index numbers so that when we move that file over to the other hotlinks, we can keep that index number preserved. So I'm going to export that. I'm going to save this to an XML file. And then I'm going to go to each of these hotlink modules and import that file. I'm going to make sure I use the by index function, and that will preserve those index numbers and bring those settings across that pink paint. So now I've got that all the attributes are lining up. I can save these hotlinks and then do a final update on my host file. And as we can see, nothing's changed in our attributes because we've already done that synchronization for Archicad. We're not trusting Archicad to do that synchronization for us in the event that we've got something that's come into those other host files that we don't want. What if we want to actually make a change? So we've decided that the host file is going to be our single point of truth. So we want to only make changes in this host file. So we're going to make a new attribute in here. I'm going to make this a blue paint. And we need to get this new attribute out to the other files through this manual synchronization process. So back to the old attribute manager and through the process we did before. And you can see now we've got that blue paint across all of our host file and our hotlink modules. So if we apply that to some of these elements, save our hotlinks, and then update our hotlinks. So we can see that new blue color has come through on the elements. It hasn't affected our attributes again because we've already done that synchronization. We've taken that role away from Archicad because we don't trust it to do the right thing. We're doing the synchronization ourselves so that we know exactly what's moving between our different files and we can keep track of it. So this is a real simplification of the process that would actually happen in a real project. But hopefully you get the idea of how you need to structure the attributes, make sure they're all aligned, and do that manual synchronization process yourself. At FTA, we never update a hotlink prior to doing this manual synchronization process. We take that role away from Archicad, we do it ourselves, and we always do it prior to doing a hotlink update. So we've run through a lot of the issues that currently exist within Archicad around attributes. So let's go through some techniques to help you manage attributes to get ahead of things and make sure you don't run into issues in the future. So first off, using the iceberg method for your hotlinks is going to save you a lot of time. Keeping all of the hotlinks coming from the same file as they're being hosted in makes sure that the attributes are one and the same. You don't have any issues with having to manually synchronize attributes between the hotlink and the host file because they're coming from the same spot. So this saves you so much time. There naturally will be a file size increase, but the trade-off between that and having to continually monitor attributes is, in my opinion, definitely worth it. Next up is the teamwork underline function. It's not a perfect foolproof solution, but it's a little extra help that can help you keep track of when new attributes may have come into your file. So in this example, I've got a file on the left and I've got a teamwork file on the right. So if I just copy an element over from the left to the right, we can see that new attribute has come in, the blue paint Dulux, and we can see it's got the underline, which in teamwork world means it's a change we haven't sent yet. But as long as we don't do a send and receive, we can track and keep an eye on anything that has an underline is something new that's come into the file that we need to deal with and manage before we send and receive. Next, in Archicad 26, we have the addition of folders and a little extra feature, which I'm not sure if it's an intentional feature or an unintentional feature. Whenever a new attribute comes into an Archicad file via copy-paste or via a hotlink update, it will always be added outside of folders. So if we create some folders here, I'll just call it paint finishes. We put all of these surfaces into a folder. Again, if we do a copy paste of that, drop it in there, that new surface will be added into the root of the surfaces, even if that's coming from a folder on the other side. So we've got paint finishes folder on the other side. We put all of those in there. So note the blue has gone into the paint finishes folder. Copy that, paste it here. It's always coming in outside. So I've been using that a lot since AC 26 came into use in our office to track any debris, illegal smuggling attributes that come into files. It's been really, really helpful. So hopefully that doesn't change with a lot of the new stuff that's coming in with attributes in future versions. But hopefully we may not need that when those other changes come in. So the next method is using a project master attributes file. So if an iceberg method isn't going to be suitable for your project, if you've got multiple different buildings that you need to hotlink together or hotlink onto a main site, using a master attribute file for that specific project is the way to go. So modifications to attributes, creations of new attributes, renaming of attributes only gets done within that master attributes files, never within the specific projects or site file or building files. And then those modifications get synchronized manually out to each of those building files via the XML method. So this makes sure that things are always in control and you can have one person who's in control of those attributes for the project. In addition to that, you can then start to lock down teamwork permissions for attributes on all of those separate project building files. So in BIM Cloud on the web interface, I've created a new role here, so just called restricted attributes. And then I've gone through and then I've turned off the permissions for anything related to attributes. I've then assigned that to a specific user, just this temporary user here, or I could assign that on users on a project by project basis. Keep in mind, if you do change restrictions on users and project users within projects, the user needs to leave the project and rejoin before those permissions are disseminated through to the user. So it's something that's caught me out in the past. Let's jump back to Archicad here and have a look at how that works in practice. So I've got a couple of additional elements here that I've assigned a new green paint attribute, and I'm going to copy those across to this host file. Now it's giving me this warning here that's saying, I can paste the elements, that's no problem, but any attributes that don't exist in the host file, it's going to assign them as missing. So let's continue anyway. Jump into 3D. The green paint hasn't come through, but neither has the attribute, which is what we want, because we don't want those extraneous things coming into our files. The thing to remember too is that even though this is missing, it still knows it's looking for index number 10. So if we do our manual synchronization and add attribute at index number 10, the green paint, that's then going to be assigned automatically. So we're circumventing those failures in the way that Archicad works with attributes and doing it ourselves, but preventing it from happening accidentally. This also works for hotlinks too. which is really good. So if we go to get rid of these elements that I pasted, save the hotlink, and then do hotlink module update. So the elements have come through again as part of the hotlink. The attribute hasn't come through. So let's do a manual attribute synchronization. Now I can't do it in this user because I've restricted all their attribute permissions. So I've got another user here which has the permissions. All right, let's do a send and receive. And then do a send and receive for a restricted user. The new attributes come through because it's been synchronized by that authorized user. And it's been applied to those elements that we updated in the hotlink. So it seems like this would solve all our issues. But with everything in Archicad, there's always a few bugs. It seems to sometimes cache the attributes for those users that doesn't have permissions and bring those in when they do a send and receive. So we haven't rolled this out onto any active projects, but in conjunction with the manual synchronization process, you may be able to limit any of your debris infections of random attributes coming into your file. So then lastly is setting up an office-wide structure for your attributes to maintain those attributes and keep them regimented across all your projects moving forward. So at FTA, we run a very stringent system of attributes. We have a large number of attributes that are predefined within our template, as you can see there. And then we have a very large, very long template with predefined codes that we then import as we require them, so that we make sure that specific index numbers are preserved for surfaces, building materials as we move forward. So if I define that I need a specific paint finish color, I'm going to select those two paint finishes colors and import them by index. And then they will come in at the specific index numbers of 1342 and 1343. So I know that in my other file, if I need to hotlink it and I also have a paint finish, it's going to be at that same index number. And I know that I can interchange them as I require without running into issues. One of the tools we've created at FTA to help us manage attributes is this Excel document. By exporting a text file out of the attribute manager and loading it into this Excel document, we can visually compare multiple different attribute lists from multiple different files. So for example, in this file, we can see that this project, we can see the 3 different buildings. We've got a master attribute file there, which is the site file on this project. And we can see visually that in building C at index number 49, someone has made a new surface and they've given it a name called Dulux Sedge Green. Now, if we were to do the hotlink update of this building into our master file, that's going to pop up not at index number 49 because 49 is already taken, all the way down at index number 80. We've got a few other little bits there. Someone's deleted some surfaces there at index number 70, and index number 69 has also been renamed in that file. So this helps us rationalize all of the information across those files and make that decision as to which one needs to be removed, which one needs to be manually moved across, and clean up all those attributes so that everything is perfectly aligned before we do any hotlink updates. So we use this document, we synchronize all of our attributes, export the text file out to Excel, run the update, and then make sure that everything is perfectly aligned before we do any hotlink updates. So next up, I've started to look at how I can do that comparison instead of in Excel, but with Python. So I've got a couple of exports from the attribute manager from Archicad into a text file. So this is from our pull try to Archicad 23 template, and I've got all attributes exported here. And this is from our Archicad 26 templates. So I've made a few changes between those two templates, and I want to compare what the differences between those two are. So I've got a Python script that I've written here. It mainly just uses a lot of for loops and utilizes pandas to integrate through and CSV to pull that information in from the text files. So if I just run this here, thinks for a little bit, and I've got an output on the left-hand side here. So I've got a very comprehensive, detailed list nominating only the changes that have been made between those two text file outputs. So any of the layer changes that the names have completely changed, they're all highlighted in red. New layers that have been added to the new 26 template have been highlighted in purple. And then we go down and we can visually see what's going on with the difference between our two outputs there. So we've got quite a significant bit of restructuring I did to some stuff. We've got a bunch of new building materials, et cetera, et cetera. So lastly, I want to show you some other Python things I've been experimenting with in regards to bulk editing of attributes. So I've got a little list of building materials here that I want to modify. So I'm going to grab all of them, move them over to the temporary right-hand list in the attribute manager using by index. I want to keep all those index numbers as is. And I'm going to export that as an XML file. So I'm going to save that over the top of this one here. Save that. So I'm going to open up my folder here. I'm just going to open this XML file in VS Code again, just so you can see what's going on. The XML files are significantly more complicated than the text files, but they really contain all of the data about all of the attributes. So they're much more comprehensive if you want to make really detailed modifications to any attribute, because it has all of that data built in there. But we can't take an XML file and open it directly in Excel because the structure isn't just a straight column and row structure. So we have to start to write some Python that takes all of that information from the XML and converts it into a CSV file for us. So let's jump over to VS Code. This is a separate code that I've written. This one's a lot more complicated. Starts to use the LXML eTree, tabulate, pandas again, to process through all of that information in the XML and convert it to a CSV. So I'm going to run that. It's outputted some files for us there. Let's just jump back. So I've only just run this for building materials at the moment, but you can potentially run it for other attributes. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to open this CSV file that it's exported in Excel. So this has given us an output, a nice clean table and column format of all of the information from that attribute. We've got index numbers, we've got names. GUIDs here aren't the actual GUIDs that are in the Archicad attributes. Every time you export a new XML file, Archicad will give these new GUIDs. So it's kind of annoying, but we'll just have to work with what we've got. But then we've got the other information here. We've got information about connection priorities, cut fill index numbers, cut fill orientation. So we can actually start to modify a lot of this information in bulk. If I decided, actually, I want all of these connection priorities to be 9,000, grab that, fill that down. If I knew the index numbers of the cut fill attribute that I wanted to apply to all of these, I could put that in there. I could change the pen index numbers for all of these. So let's just do that. Let's just change these all to pen number index 1. Fill that down. And I can even start to put some test data in the end of some of these. Do that. You could also re-index some of these attributes too and give them a new index number, but you're probably going to start to run into issues then when you bring it back into Archicad, because if I rename this to index number 30, for example, let's just do it, see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to save that. So let's just jump back to VS Code now for a different script that I've written. It basically does the reverse of what the first one did. It takes that CSV information that we've modified in Excel, converts it back to the XML, and then we can load that back into Archicad. So let's run this. and we can see we've got some information about what's going on. This one has been re-indexed, what we did, and all the rest of them have had their connection and cut fills updated. So if we jump back to Archicad, let's close that one that we exported before, go to import and open our building materials file that we had, the XML file. And we can see that information, that test that we added on the end of some of those has come through. And then that one that we re-indexed there is changed to 30. So if we just go straight through and go by index there, that one that we re-indexed has an issue because it's 30. It was previously 25. Archicad doesn't know how to rationalize that. So the system's not foolproof. There's obviously still some chinks in the armor, but it definitely makes making those big, massive edits to big list of attributes super simple. So the last Python experimentation I want to show you is being able to create an attribute file from scratch in Excel. So instead of having to export an XML, modify it in Archicad, convert it back to an XML and import it, I can create the XML directly from Excel. So I've got a Excel document here, and I've got a couple of columns. I've got the attribute type, I've got the index numbers that I want, I've got some names, and I've got the connection priority. Key to note that the name of these columns is specifically the XML node name so that it knows how to match those up when it creates the XML file. I've also done some tricky things in Excel here that I've got the information of the names that I wanted to create, and I've got some numbering. So then I've concatenated that information together to build that information automatically in Excel, which would not be possible in Archicad. So I'll save that, and then I'll jump back to Visual Studio Code. Then this code is kind of an extrapolation of the other ones. It starts to get a lot more hectic around having to define what the defaults of all of those XML tags are. There's a lot of trial and error in actually working out what the bare minimum of all that information is, so that Archicad doesn't have a mental breakdown when it tries to bring that information in and say, oh, this isn't a valid XML file. So let's run that. We've got this linked to here. A lot of verbose output there to check that everything is right, and then it's created us an XML file here. So we'll jump back to Archicad, and we're going to import. And we can see it's imported this whole list with all of the attributes there. So I can grab all these and drop them in, and then we've built a whole attribute table list at the click of a finger. So to wrap up, a couple of key suggestions on how to deal with things. Know what index numbers are being created and coming into your file at. Join the index number obsessors club. We're always welcome to have more members. Iceberg your hot links. If I could iceberg every single project that I work on that has hot links, it's not possible on everything, I would do it. Define your single point of truth for attributes. Only change them in one location and then synchronize them to your other files. Manually sync your attributes with the XML files. Don't trust Archicad to sync your attributes because it will screw them up. Never do a hotlink module update without first verifying your attributes are synchronized correctly. And patience. Accept that if you're hotlink modulating separate files, you will inevitably need to spend a couple of days at some point to re-rationalize all of your attributes in your project, and it will drive you insane. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope this session helped. We've only really just scratched the surface of how deep the attribute issue goes. If you have any feedback, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear how you guys handle attributes yourself. Thanks. See ya.